Hello there, and welcome to today's webcast, Taking Your Work Virtual, How States and Localities Are Moving Their Workforces and Workplaces into the Digital Era. Hi, I'm Terry Takai, and I'm the co-director for the Center for Digital Government. And I'm really excited to serve as the host for today's webcast. Thanks for joining us. We're going to have a great session over the next 30 minutes. You know, as state and local government agencies have responded to the global pandemic, public sector workforces and workplaces have shifted to the new normal, working from home. As the nation recovers, what's the lasting impact on how and where public employees work? This 30-minute virtual conversation will unpack lessons learned from the immediate response, explore the challenges of returning to work, and look at the long-term impact on our overall workforce strategies. I'm really excited today to have joining me two great friends. Rob Lloyd, who's the Chief Information Officer for the City of San Jose, California, and all the way on the other coast, Mike Leahy, who is the Secretary of Information Technology for the Maryland Department of Information Technology. But before we start, here are a few housekeeping notes for you on the screen. As you're looking at those, I just want to comment that you can also, during today's webcast, connect with your peers via LinkedIn and Twitter. For those of you on Twitter, please use hashtag GovTechLive or hashtag GovLive to share key takeaways, quotes, and learnings from today's webcast. But as we move ahead, I really want to make a point that over these next 30 minutes, this is really the second of many new virtual conversations that are part of a joint program, the Crisis Response Initiative, that is jointly being hosted by Government Technology and Governing. This initiative, which lives on govtech.com/crisisresponse and governing.com/crisisresponse, aggregates data, news, virtual conversations like today's, and industry resources to really equip government leaders with tactics to respond to crisis and the new normal ahead. So what are we talking about today? Well, what we really want to talk about is, what does it really mean as we're thinking about returning to work? What does that mean from a technology and employee perspective? How's that really going to change the way we lead in the new world? And then I want to kind of ask the speakers to give us a little bit of their crystal ball on what they think the virtual workplace is going to look like in the next 12 months. So we'll be asking them for their views and give them kind of a crystal ball opportunity. And then we'll wrap up and close. But to open up, the center actually did what we call a post-COVID-19 behavior survey, just to ask people what they have done and how they think they're going to be moving forward. So if you take a look at this, it's really interesting that while we think of those employees that actually did go to remote work, we're looking and seeing that it's about a 60 to 40% split. But what's more interesting, if you actually look at the slide, is how folks are really thinking about that return to work. And I think, as we've seen, it's not an all or nothing. Folks are really looking at the whole spectrum from now through the next 12 months in thinking about how they might return to work and when they might return to work. So let's kind of move that conversation ahead. And Mike, let's start with you. What has been, first of all, just, what actions have you taken and what percentage of your IT staff is really working remotely? And then what has been the impact on your employees of making that move?
You bet. Thank you so much, Terry. The interesting thing is 100% of my staff is working remotely, and we do have some folks that are working on the infrastructure side that have to go take deliveries of equipment as it comes in or pick up parts to repair things, but 99% of people have been out of the office the entire time since we went to telework in mid-March. The impact, surprisingly, has been very positive. I am amazed at how folks have adjusted to teleworking, and 99% of the comments we've received have been very positive, that they really like not having to commute through traffic. And the principal issue I have found has been more that folks, because they aren't taking breaks, they get up, they start working in the morning, they might eat a sandwich sitting at the computer at lunchtime. So they're working longer, and because we're doing things telephonically and through email, they, even into the evening, are still communicating with each other. And I have on a number of occasions had to tell folks, stop and take an hour off, which isn't what we typically hear about government employees, but it has been my principal issue. I'm amazed at how well things have worked so far.
Well, that's fantastic. So as you're doing that, you know, one of the things that we've always talked about, and one of the things that's been really interesting here, is that many organizations that resisted having anyone go to remote work really didn't have a choice. They needed to move in that direction. But one of the challenges behind that, and what we heard was, well, how am I going to know what people are doing? How am I going to be able to monitor, quote, the work? And so how have you actually met that challenge, particularly not only for yourself, but, you know, it has to really trickle down into your supervisors and your managers.
Yeah.
So how does that change the way that your organization works?
Well, there are a couple of changes that I kid folks about, because having practiced law for many years, I now get to share the grief of having to fill out timesheets with everyone. And so in the methodology where people report their hours, we actually have them now specify what they've been working on and what they've been doing. We have what are probably more often virtual meetings where an entire group will get together with their supervisor once or twice a week and talk about the specific aspects of what is being accomplished and what challenges they're facing. And in terms of work that is intellectual and is more difficult to track, we have implemented some tools whereby if we choose to go look, we can see how many lines of code folks are working on. We may not look at the exact code, but we can see what the output has been, and we have metrics for that. And if folks are falling behind, obviously we call them and ask what the problem is. Similarly, with our help desk and our technicians that are doing Tier 2 and Tier 3 work, we have a record over the last several years of how many calls people typically can deal with in an hour, how many they would typically expect in an hour. And obviously there were more when everyone moved to telework. And so we have a number of metrics that we've been not only keeping track of, but publishing to our employees. And so they have a benchmark. And as I said, production has actually gone up.
Well, that's amazing.
It really is.
So as you're thinking about what the next steps are going to be, you know, as you're returning to work, has Maryland established any guidelines? Let's first talk about the organization overall, and then move to, you know, what you're thinking in terms of the planning for the IT organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we have to start that discussion with an understanding that the IT organization is not typically citizen-facing. We are servicing the other executive agencies that do deal with the public and with the public's concerns. So there are two aspects of this because they've gone on telework also. So we are attempting to create methodologies and tools so we can standardize how folks are doing their analysis of data, how folks are using chatbots, how folks are working remotely in terms of the security and virtual private network information, how we are creating the ability to virtualize meetings and meeting spaces and standardize all of this so that the folks who are outward looking to the citizenry have the ability to utilize those tools to reach citizens digitally. And although most citizens haven't moved in that direction yet, there is considerable adaptation to it because of the use of mobile devices and folks finding that when we had shutdown and lockdown of various entities and agencies, that the only way to get government services was digitally or through the telephone, and the digital experience was far more personalized. It was available, 12 to 18 hours a day rather than the telephone being available lesser time period. And then the other piece of this with regard to my people, and I think the state generally, is although the pandemic has been horrid in its impact on people and what they consider their normal lives, here in Maryland, we have a number of state facilities that we're going to close in the next 2 years. And the original plan had been to rent office space while new facilities were built. And at least for my agency, I'm probably going to give up 2/3 of the physical space we use currently. And for the agencies that exist in that particular facility, we're looking at renting far less office space to fulfill their needs and have more people work on a rotating basis remotely as they are today.
Well, that's great, Mike. Thanks for that update. Well, Rob, let me turn to you and shift the focus a little bit around and over to leadership. So, what have been the greatest leadership challenges for you in San Jose? How are you going to manage, and have you had to manage differently? And how do you see yourself changing the way you manage in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Terry. And building on some of Mike's comments, this has been one of those magic moments in some ways that a lot of the barriers that traditionally have existed in the organization have kind of subsided. And we've rallied together as a city where we provide the local services and said there's really 3 missions and imperatives that we're focusing on for the community. And the organizational layer and the public-facing layer are going to have to align towards those 3 things. One of those is protecting lives, because this is a pandemic, and that comes first. Second is actually protecting livelihoods because of the economy and what some of the equity impacts and the larger impacts. There was the vision from our leadership that if we don't respond to the livelihood question, then we'd be falling a bit short. And then the last thing is the organizational health, is how do we make sure that the city traverses these parallel crises effectively in a way that the city is going to be strong during and strong coming out of those, that we can support the things that we need to support. And that ranged from taking on food and necessities distribution for the county as they were overwhelmed with the health issues, as we partnered on testing and data and those efforts, along with kind of the core competencies and really at the basics items of making sure people could work remotely. And a lot of attention went towards that. But what we told our organization is, really, these are continuations of things that we predicted in our IT strategic plan of the recession. We talked about the more mobile workforce, the more remote needs, the expectations of users on CX and UX that are changing. So really what this was an accelerant of those things. We were well positioned in some ways, but the honest truth is the human latency is still the work that we're working through along with that planning. I can tell you in terms of the internal leadership, we have a couple things defined, what we call stage 6 through 10. 6 through 8 is gradual reopening. And how we've done that is we've gone through the budget programs that are funded, asked departments to prioritize which ones need to open up in which role and phase, until you get to 9, where there's a vaccine that's being implemented, and 10, where people are vaccinated and you manage it like the flu. Those 9 and 10 periods look a bit off right now. We haven't seen a good track at vaccination yet. So we know that we're going to be operating in a phase of gradual reopening and highly remote work. And there's basically 3 reasons we'll do that. Number 1 is we can't afford to have everyone come back and pay for all that PPE on a daily basis. Plus, it puts them at risk. Number 2 is we also have the reality of we can do more remotely now. We do online inspections. We have the Planning, Building, Code Enforcement has had a project, and they're going gradually and now more rapidly towards complete online services, telemetry, and some of the tools that we have. Those are powerful things that now we are adopting a lot faster. The other 2 pieces of the internal leadership, along with that more remote need, is the focus we've had on omni-channel. So we need to engage our residents how they are and bring them along in this journey so that we don't change and leave them behind. But fortunately, we have a pretty tech-savvy community here in Silicon Valley. The last one is how people's jobs are going to change. I think you alluded that to some of it for Mike. Parts of our areas, they're fields, parts of it, they're tech. But generally speaking, we've had fairly high adoption of objectives and key results in Scrum. And for us, really delivery of the projects, delivery of support, maintenance of key metrics, we allow people the space to do their work as long as they're delivering on what they need to deliver on. So some of the cultural shifts we've had over the last 3-4 years, as we've adopted more of that innovation culture, are starting to pay off for us. But just to summarize it, we have some leadership we have to display and exhibit and honor as part of the local community where we take our community. We also have the human latency on the inside where we have to take our staff through a journey, and we're going to adapt to these things together and iterate. And then on the long run, we have parallel crises that are happening, resource demands, resource constraints. And the honest truth we have to tell everyone is we're going to be figuring these things out together, because now we also have fires, public safety power shutoffs. There's other things. I heard there's an asteroid, so I'm pretty worried. But everything seems to be mounting, and you can't catch your breath. And the most key thing we have as leaders then is you don't ratchet down and focus on just churning. Those are the moments where you have to look up and how we partner.
That's great, Mike. Thank you so much, Rob, for giving us kind of that backdrop on what's happening in San Jose. You know, one of the things that actually you and I had a chance to chat about also, though, were things like just our regular processes needing to catch up. So maybe you could talk a little bit about just policies and procedures, if you will, or even regulations that are out there that you'll be examining, you know, as you move forward under this new way of thinking about working virtually.
Sure. So those IT implements of our return to work plan really focus on 2 things, and some of the preparatory work that we were fortunate to have been doing already. One is what we call the drive to digital, and that means how are we going to take our processes, our practices, our rituals to a highly remote state. And the other one is a secure city. And how do we address a lot of these risks that we're seeing and are quite worried about, because the criminals out there have noticed the remote work presents more vulnerabilities. And they also have been tracking all those articles about the billions and trillions of aid that are going to governments. And we're seeing some pretty nasty patterns. So we have to make sure those 2 things are there. On the policy side, we've been setting up really 4 main avenues of preparation. One was the ordinance and policy to do what we call business process automation, to say we're going to digitize all those paper processes where we physically had to push something. Another one was the flexible and alternate workplacing. And because of our traffic situation and our high cost of living, those were things that we were working on. This allowed us to crack some of the seals more rapid. Number 3 is the ability to re-engineer. And I'll tell you, for all the tech, it's the easy part The hard part is re-engineering because of that human latency. And we've had some projects, and you and I have been able to chat about some of those successes and some of those learnings. But at least we're in a spot where we've iterated and we've practiced that evolutionary skill to keep on improving without fear. But the fourth one that we really have to master, I think, more quickly than we were originally planning, because our roadmap was really a year and a half, 2 years. Now it's going to be more like 6 months to a year, is how do we bring along the public in that journey? So one option is you make your services so simple and friendly that they don't have to learn much. That's the primary avenue. But some of the things that cities, counties, and states do are complex. Some of the applications, the bureaucracy behind it can't be overly simplified as fast as we would like. So how do you train? How do you communicate? How do you coach businesses and residents through some of the changes that we'll be making? Truth is, we know we're going to slip in some spots and not shine. In other areas, we're going to radiate because we got those things done well. But these are crazier times, and the tolerance, at least for the next 6 months, maybe a year, is a bit higher.
Great. Well, thanks. Thanks so much, Rob. One last question before we, go to having both you and Mike, respond for us. Has this changed, or do you think this will change any of your personnel policies as it relates to recruitment and hiring?
You want it first, Mike, or you want me?
Well, I'll jump in. Thanks. Absolutely, it's going to change my practices. We're looking for talented people. As Rob said, for whatever reason, both coasts seem to be far more expensive in terms of living expenses than the middle of the country. And one would be amazed at how many IT professionals live in the middle of the country that would be thrilled to be paid the salaries we pay here in Maryland if they didn't have to come live here and pay the taxes and the cost of housing. So we've already started reaching out in areas in terms of our DevOps and our application methodologies to find people that physically don't have to be here terribly often to fill those positions that would be thrilled to make what we can pay on a government salary, which typically is about half of what the private sector pays here.
And for San Jose, it's much the same. We have what we call ultra commuters, people who live 2-3 hours away one way. And they still work because of the salary, and there's a differential. But we've talked about how do you hire the person who doesn't necessarily have to come. So they live in Sacramento where it's cheaper, but they still do great work for you. I'll tell you, Terry, the worry we have is how do you build a sense of team, and how do we teach our managers to manage remote work groups in a way where they can build an esprit de corps, they understand the organizational culture. It is something we worry about, but there's also the pluses that you mentioned or you alluded to, which is we're going to have more and better hiring options as we get more comfortable with the idea that people can be at lots of places and still do good work. So I think there is some good there. And then also some of the resistance of managers. We have to teach our managers how to manage differently now. And we're looking for the magic bullet on that one, but I think we're just going to have to coach and mentor ourselves through what that different management looks like.
One variation on that question around both in terms of the management team and how the management team's going to operate is that I think all the IT organizations have been struggling with what does it mean to go to an agile approach, namely to whether it's an agile development approach or applying agile elsewhere. And agile has actually always been dependent upon sort of face-to-face, sort of team structures, often open space, office layout. So, how would you see being able to continue to move your teams in an agile approach when they are not co-located?
We practice that. Let me see if I can turn my camera around. So you can see our exec scrum board. It's one whole wall in my office. And that's actually how we manage things in 2-week sprints across our management team. Those are the executive team, the high coordination, high impact items, high profile items. But then each of the teams actually manages their Scrum boards in their own ways. But you're right, Terry, a lot of Agile is ritual. And how you establish those rituals physically is in many ways a lot easier because you have a practice and you have a culture. And that's kind of what I was alluding to in our managers. They're going to have to learn how to take that remote, but also kind of meet the human needs of building a team where you feel like you are a part of something. But so for us, it hasn't been hard, but it's been incomplete. So we're going to have to keep on mastering how you manage the agile remote team, because our optimal is when people are practicing it together in a space. So I'm not sure if I have a good answer for you, but we have been able to adapt it remotely for the most part. But I would say it's probably 70, 80% as effective.
Mike, let me turn to you.
I echo what Rob said. I think the principal issue is that when we look at these significant issues, the technology is the easy part. It's the governance and the team building that have to take precedence. And we've been very lucky so far that we have not experienced significant issues with folks working remotely because they are still getting on Google Meet up together, 3-4 times a day. And we have a rather robust set of circumstances where a couple of times a day, almost anybody can reach me from within the ranks of the organization and our vendor community. So thus far, the issues have arisen that have been addressable fairly quickly. I think the risk we face is going to occur when we can return to the office, but choose not to in some cases. And the human contact and the ability to read body language, which is 90% of communication, as well as the just proximity, is something we're going to have to find ways to encourage on a more limited basis.
Great. Well, great. Thank you so much for your comments today. So I'm going to pose a question to each of you and give you 60 seconds to give me your best impressions here. So if you had to predict the future, what do you think your state and city will look like 12 months from now as it relates to your virtual workforce and your virtual workplace? So Rob, let me start with you.
So I think if I have to guess in an educated way, we're going to be highly remote still. I think because of the timeline for vaccinations, we're going to stay in that roughly 20 to 30% staffing rate on a daily basis, minus some areas where there's high touch, like police, where you have to have a lot of field staff. Number two is people are going to get a lot more culturally capable about PPE practices, physical distancing practices, hygiene. And also, they're going to learn hygiene related to cybersecurity. We're going to teach them because of necessity and habituate them that there's going to have to be different practices, and the risks now and the vulnerabilities are so intense that they're going to have to be partaking of a new normal. And the third thing I would say is I think we're also going to be shaped for some equity discussions. It was part of what we had planned out in February and March, but I think some of the civil unrest is speaking to that, is how some of the disease, how some other things are affecting our community where they feel a part or not a part of the community. We have to make sure we do everything in our power that the services are meeting their needs, that we're talking with them, that we're engaging them, that we're giving them service options that are friendly to them. And I'll end on this, is our public meetings for council used to have maybe 12 to 24 people who would show up for council meetings unless there was a really hot topic. Now we get hundreds of people online watching and participating, thousands of e-comments, dozens to hundreds of requests to speak cards. So this has been good in some ways, but the equity piece is something we're really going to have to dedicate to.
Mike, I'll turn to you.
I'm going to echo what Rob said with a couple of rather quick additions. Because of the lockdown, government revenues at the state and local level are down. Sales tax is down. The income tax is down, with unemployment rising considerably. And so the biggest issue we're going to face is, how do we find ways to budget to digitize our applications, which not only make them friendlier but less expensive to operate, against what other aspects of government have to occur on a day-to-day basis that have to be funded. And I think that's the biggest challenge we're going to face. I think we also will be, from the IT standpoint, working remotely 12 months from now. And the bigger question goes to, how do we spread the use of technology to other agencies in ways that allow them to be more effective and efficient in delivering services and then in analyzing the results of that delivery.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Mike and Rob. I really can't tell you how much we appreciate your comments and your insights. I know everyone on this webinar would really is benefiting from that. So with that, let me close for today. I'd like to thank our sponsors: IBM, Cisco, DLT, DocuSign, Elastic, Red Hat, Tenable, and VMware for making it possible for us to have this important webcast discussion today. And thanks in advance to our audience for spending time with us. And we look forward to seeing you again soon at another government technology and governing event. Have a great rest of your day.